For 6 months, the squadron at Edwards Air Force Base had been calling Lieutenant Zoe Thompson washed up before she even got started, claiming her obsession with vintage aircraft was useless for modern combat. But when 6 advanced enemy fighters penetrated restricted airspace and F-22s couldn't engage, Zoe would climb into a Vietnam-era F-4 Phantom and show them why old-school flying still matters. Welcome to Hidden Valor. This story begins at Edwards Air Force Base in California, home to the Air Force Test Center where cutting-edge aviation technology meets experimental flight operations. The base housed the most advanced fighter aircraft in the world, including F-22 Raptors and F-35 Lightning IIs that represented the pinnacle of modern aerial warfare capabilities. Lieutenant Zoe Thompson, 25 years old, had been assigned to the 412th Test Wing for 6 months. With short blonde hair, intense blue eyes, and a quiet intensity that her squadron mates interpreted as social awkwardness, she spent her off-duty hours studying vintage aircraft manuals and flight characteristics that seemed irrelevant to contemporary aviation. But what the 412th Test Wing didn't know was that Zoe Thompson had grown up on vintage aircraft, learning to fly in her grandfather's restored warbirds, and developing an understanding of analog flight systems that exceeded most pilots' comprehension of modern digital avionics. The squadron was led by Major Rick Stevens, a 12-year veteran with over 1,500 hours in fifth-generation fighters and a reputation for embracing the most advanced technologies available to modern pilots. Stevens commanded through technological superiority, believing that superior equipment and digital systems were the keys to air combat success. Stevens had viewed Zoe as a liability from her first day at Edwards. Her fascination with vintage aircraft seemed like a waste of time and mental energy that should have been focused on mastering contemporary systems and modern combat techniques. "Thompson," Stevens announced during the weekly squadron briefing, "I've been reviewing your study materials, and frankly, your obsession with obsolete aircraft is concerning. We're test pilots for 21st century technology, not museum curators." Zoe looked up from the F-4 Phantom technical manual she was reading, maintaining her professional composure despite 6 months of constant criticism from squadron members who questioned her priorities. "Sir, understanding historical aircraft development helps inform current design decisions." "The problem isn't historical knowledge," Stevens replied dismissively. "The problem is that you're spending time on aircraft that have no relevance to modern combat operations. F-22s and F-35s use completely different technologies and tactics." This had been Stevens' consistent theme since Zoe's arrival. Her study of vintage flight characteristics, analog instrumentation, and manual flight control systems seemed like wasted effort when modern aircraft relied on fly-by-wire systems and digital automation. Captain James Rodriguez, the squadron's most experienced F-22 pilot, joined the conversation. "Zoe, those old aircraft were limited by their technology. Modern fighters have capabilities that make vintage tactics obsolete." Captain Lisa Martinez nodded in agreement. "Thompson, you need to focus on contemporary systems. Studying 1960s aircraft won't help you understand current threat environments or modern combat requirements." The truth was that Zoe's vintage aircraft knowledge reflected capabilities that modern pilots had never needed to develop. Her understanding of manual flight control, analog instrumentation, and systems that operated without computer assistance represented skills that contemporary aviation had largely automated away. "Thompson," Stevens continued, "until you demonstrate that you can master modern systems instead of obsessing over museum pieces, you're restricted to ground duties. No flight operations until you prove you understand current priorities." Zoe had endured 6 months of this treatment while maintaining her study of aircraft systems that her colleagues dismissed as irrelevant. Her grandfather, Colonel William Thompson, had been a Vietnam War ace who taught her that understanding fundamental flight principles mattered more than relying on automated systems. The crisis began during Tuesday afternoon when the base's early warning systems detected multiple unknown aircraft approaching restricted airspace at high speed. The contacts appeared on radar as 6 advanced fighters using stealth technology and electronic warfare capabilities that challenged conventional identification methods. All aircraft, this is Edwards Control," the tower announced. We have multiple unknown contacts bearing 270 degrees at 50 miles. All F-22s are cleared for immediate intercept. Stevens led a four-ship formation of F-22 Raptors toward the approaching threats, expecting to engage with standard beyond visual range tactics that had proven effective against conventional adversaries. What they encountered was something completely unexpected. The enemy aircraft were using advanced electronic warfare systems that jammed F-22 radar, disrupted communication systems, and rendered the Raptors' technological advantages useless. Stevens found his supposedly superior fighters unable to lock onto targets or coordinate attacks against adversaries who had neutralized their advanced capabilities. Edwards Control, this is Viper 1, Stevens transmitted with growing frustration. Enemy aircraft are jamming all our systems. We cannot achieve radar lock or coordinate engagement. Viper 1, understands systems compromised. What is your tactical assessment? Control, these aircraft are using electronic warfare capabilities that exceed our countermeasures. Our F-22s are effectively neutralized. Zoe monitored the radio transmissions from the Squadron Operations Center, listening to experienced pilots struggle with an enemy that had turned their technological advantages into vulnerabilities. The jamming systems were specifically designed to target the digital avionics that modern aircraft depended on for combat effectiveness. That's when she made a suggestion that would change everything. "Sir," Zoe said to the operations commander, "the museum has a restored F-4 Phantom that's been maintained in flyable condition. Analog systems, no digital avionics to jam." Colonel Patricia Washington, the base commander, looked at Zoe with confusion. "Thompson, you're suggesting we use a Vietnam-era fighter against modern stealth aircraft?" "Ma'am, the enemy jamming systems are designed to target contemporary avionics. The F-4 uses completely analog flight systems that their electronic warfare can't affect." Washington studied the tactical display showing her advanced fighters being systematically neutralized by an enemy that had prepared specifically to counter modern aircraft. "Thompson, do you actually know how to fly an F-4 Phantom?" "Yes, ma'am. I've been studying vintage aircraft systems for years. My grandfather taught me analog flight techniques before I joined the Air Force. It was a desperate decision, but Washington was watching her most advanced fighters fail against an enemy that had turned technological superiority into a disadvantage. "Thompson, you're cleared to attempt intercept in the F-4. All other aircraft are to provide support but maintain distance." Zoe climbed into the restored F-4 Phantom, an aircraft that had been built in 1967 and represented technology that most modern pilots had never experienced. Analog gauges, manual flight controls, and systems that required pilot skill rather than computer assistance. But to Zoe, the cockpit felt familiar. Years of studying vintage systems and learning from her grandfather had prepared her for exactly this scenario. The engagement that followed lasted 18 minutes and redefined everyone's understanding of aviation technology's relationship to pilot skill. The enemy fighters, configured to jam digital systems, found themselves facing an aircraft that operated completely outside their electronic warfare capabilities. The F-4's analog systems were immune to jamming, giving Zoe capabilities that the enemy had not anticipated. Her first engagement eliminated two enemy aircraft using tactics that combined vintage air combat maneuvering with modern situational awareness. The enemy pilots found themselves outflown by an aircraft they had dismissed as obsolete. Edwards Control, Phantom 1, two enemy aircraft destroyed, continuing engagement. Her second attack eliminated three more enemy fighters using energy management and positioning techniques that demonstrated mastery of fundamental flight principles rather than reliance on automated systems. The final enemy aircraft attempted to disengage, but Zoe's understanding of basic aerodynamics and energy conservation allowed her to intercept the fleeing target using skills that modern pilots rarely needed to develop. Edwards Control, Phantom 1. All six enemy aircraft destroyed. Area secure. When Zoe landed the F-4 Phantom, the entire squadron was waiting on the flight line. Stevens approached with an expression that showed complete reevaluation of everything he thought he knew about aviation technology and pilot capabilities. "Thompson, what you just accomplished should have been impossible. How does a Vietnam-era fighter defeat six modern stealth aircraft?" Zoe removed her vintage flight helmet, revealing the calm composure of someone who had just validated years of unconventional study. Sir, the enemy prepared to fight our technology, not our skills. The F-4 forced them to engage in basic air combat maneuvering, where pilot ability mattered more than electronic systems. Rodriguez stepped forward with obvious respect. Zoe, you just proved that fundamental flying skills still matter in an age of automated warfare? Martinez nodded with genuine admiration. Thompson, your vintage aircraft knowledge wasn't obsolete. It was exactly what we needed when modern technology failed. 6 months later, Lieutenant Colonel Zoe Thompson was promoted and assigned to develop new training programs that combined contemporary technology with fundamental flight skills. Her engagement with enemy stealth fighters became a classified case study, demonstrating that pilot expertise could overcome technological disadvantages when applied with proper understanding. Stevens became one of her strongest advocates, frequently telling other commanders, never dismiss knowledge just because it seems outdated. Sometimes the oldest solutions work best against the newest problems. Zoe often reflected on her 6 months of being dismissed for studying vintage aircraft while carrying knowledge that would prove decisive when technological solutions failed. She had learned that innovation often required understanding fundamental principles that advanced systems had automated away. Sometimes the most valuable knowledge is the kind that others dismiss as obsolete. And sometimes the pilot everyone calls washed up is actually the one who understands that skill matters more than technology when everything else fails. Thanks for watching Hidden Valor. If this story inspired you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that fundamental expertise never becomes obsolete, and that the most important capabilities are often the ones that seem least relevant until the moment when nothing else works.